Hi, my name is Carson Hood, and I'm doing a research paper on parent significance to deaf children's language development. To start off, I would like to go over some important statistics. A survey from Gallaudet suggests that most 40% of all families use sign language at home for both hearing and deaf children. 40% of families with school-aged deaf children use sign language at home. As many as 70% of deaf children are deprived of language, and with that being said, approximately 90 to 95% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. I want to discuss the topic of deaf parents with deaf children and hearing parents with deaf children. Depending on the family in which a deaf baby is born, early communication takes place in sign language, spoken language, or mixed varieties. Sign language can be best observed in deaf children from deaf parents, as their signed input is most natural and complete. On the other hand, deaf children from hearing parents generally show delay in developing sign language proficiency. The language skills of deaf children with hearing parents lag far behind those of hearing children with hearing parents and deaf children with deaf parents. Gestural communication. Deaf children of hearing parents can often develop a gestural communication system with some properties of early child language. Previous studies of deaf children of hearing parents have shown that these children spontaneously use gestures to communicate even if they are not exposed to a sign language. Susan Golden Meadow and Carolyn Mylander did a study on 4 deaf children and their parents' influence on their gestural communication. They wanted to prove that the deaf child's hearing parents were somewhat responsible for the emergence of the child's gesture system and their sentence structure. This study confirmed deaf children lacking a conventional linguistic input can develop a gestural communication system that shows some of the structural regularities of early child language. A quote that I found while doing my research was this: "Many parents, because they are not fully aware of what is at stake and thus accept the long-standing but erroneous claim that acquiring a sign language will impede speech development, seek resources devoted to supporting spoken language learning." This is important to the topic because of the large percentage of deaf children that have hearing parents. Those children are naturally introduced to a spoken language and are not set up for complete success. Hearing parents of infants typically interact with their babies in ways to help them develop language. They echo the sounds a baby makes, encourages their babies to make sounds, and the same can be done for babies who are deaf. Parents can interact with their babies in similar ways by signing to them, encouraging them to try to form signs, and shape the hands of their babies to form signs. Parental involvement plays a huge role in a deaf child's language development. I looked into 2 case studies. This first case study, Anne was followed from birth to 2 years old. This is a study of the language acquisition and literacy learning of deaf children at home and school. Anne's family includes her 2 deaf parents, her deaf sister, and herself, who is also deaf. Listed are the developmental stages of conversation that a hearing child would experience, but so did Anne. Around 11 months, a first word is being said, or signed in Anne's case, and in the continuing months, the child becomes a partner in conversation. Next, at 20 to 28 months, she develops steady conversation. And finally, at 29 to 36 months, she is understanding and practicing language. Anne is considered an atypical deaf child, but she developed in ways that are typical for hearing children. Anne's deaf parents were focused on establishing and maintaining her visual attention from an early age. This resulted in her learning American Sign Language and developing language at a typical rate. This next case study included the observation of 10 deaf children with hearing parents. 5 of them are listed below to show their development. First, child 1 is 8 years old, but identifies as 2 years old based on his language development. Child 3, 16 years old, identifies as 13 months old based on his language development. Less than half of the families assessed early intervention services, which are provided for the family when the child is between the ages 0 to 3. Early intervention services are helpful for parents and deaf children to start learning to communicate with sign language. One parent of the 10 was matched with a deaf mentor who is a significant part of the family learning sign language. This case study's conclusion was that the parents who were interviewed expressed strong motivation to learn and use sign language with their children, but they still only experienced limited success. My conclusion for my paper is that having parents who can sign play a huge role in a deaf child's sign language development. As stated before, in Anne's case, both of her parents were deaf, and her language development was equivalent to that of a hearing child. In the next case study, the 10 children whose parents were hearing and were not motivated enough to learn sign language, their language development lacked. Hearing parents who do not make significant efforts to expose their deaf children to sign language can have negative impacts on the child's language development.